Alright, so I got the Ornithopter completely solo in Dune Awakening, and let me tell you, it doesn't actually take as long as you think it does. In this video, I'm going to show you a step-by-step breakdown of everything you need to do to actually get there quicker, plus some other tips along the way. So let's get started with a quick breakdown of the resource needs. Just for the Ornithopter alone, including crafting it, you're going to need 241 aluminum ingots, or about 1700 aluminum ore, 82 cobalt paste, or the equivalent of 246 erythrite. Both of these will consume a lot of water, with the aluminum ingot being by far the highest, in total 57,410, but don't worry, you can actually get that much quicker than you think. Besides this, 46 advanced Servoks, 22 particle capacitors, 8 complex machinery, 14 Diamondine dust, 7 carbide scraps, 8 industrial pumps. But this doesn't include the medium ore refiner and the vehicle fabricator, which you also need to craft to be able to actually create these items. So that's going to be another 60 cobalt paste, another 50 complex machineries, 125 steel ingot, and also 30 complex machinery plus another 40 steel ingot, which obviously requires its own water as well, another 12,750 for these two, refiner and fabricator. So that's going to bring you closer to 70,000 total water, probably closer to 100,000 if we're looking at from start of the game all the way to this point, because you're going to funnel other resources here as well. But guess what? Only a couple or 3 of the resources are problematic out of all of these. This includes mostly the water, the aluminum, and maybe the Diamondine. Everything else is very manageable, which is why I'm going to break this all down to you into a very digestible, bite-sized farm. So here are 3 tips that I recommend right before you actually start this farm. First of all, I highly recommend, well, not completely needed, but I highly recommend to set up your base somewhere in between the eastern shield wall and the Haga Rift, just because this is going to give you access to the overwhelming majority of the resources that you need. This is going to include especially aluminum, but there are many places here in which you can collect a ton of water if, for example, you're using a Reaper. Plus, of course, you also get access to the Haga Rift, which gives you all of the other stuff for the cobalt paste and some of the complex machinery that you also need. Everything else, like for example the Diamondine dust and some of the other more rare resources we're gonna get from Misataril and some of the pumps from the Sentinel City, but that is basically it. That's going to be quick and we only need about a dozen of them. Besides that, absolutely make use of the pilot over at any trade post to fast travel in between these locations. That is why I also set up my base close to the trade post in this case, so that I can do it much quicker. It's only 700 Solari per run, but at this point you should have plenty of money, and fast traveling is going to save you so much time and danger that you don't have to travel in between regions. And you will be doing that quite a bit, even for fast tracking reasons, or if you go back at your base, simply because you cannot carry that much on your character. For example, for aluminum ore, your character can only take up to like 250 at most, which is nothing. But this brings me to tip number 3, and that is to make this as efficient as possible. We're going to focus on each resource at a time, because like I said, only about 3 of them are problematic, and even in those cases, about 30 minutes for each of them to fully complete everything is all you need, excluding the timers to refine stuff and whatnot. So let's get started with the first that I recommend having, because it needs to run in the background, and that's going to be water. So in this case, you're going to want to make every single run count. That is why, as you can see, I have crafted a whole bunch of these medium blood bags. Some of them I also purchased from the Anvil trade post. They go for about 2,000 to 3,000 Solari, so it's quite inexpensive. In this case, I have about 6 or 7 of them, plus several other small blood bags, which in total let me carry about 70,000, give or take, of that enemy liquid, which I can then transform into water, which is going to be very good. A single run of this can almost cover about half of our needs if we do this properly. So in this case, you're going to want to combine this with also a blood extractor MK2, which is going to give you 2 liters for every single extraction from the enemy. You can possibly even double dip if you have one of the drinker weapons like Caleb's drinker or Scipio's drinker sword. In this case, that both help a bit with that, so you can both extract via sword attacks as well as then via the extractor. However, it's quite marginal, so I mostly focused on just having the extractor MK2. And from this point on, we're going to focus on places with as many enemies as possible because we want to collect that blood as quick as possible. So high concentration of enemies can include, for example, in the Rift, one of the best is Barracks 47. In this case, it's going to give you both the blood and quite a few of the resources you're going to need for crafting the Ornithopter. Anyway, it's right here very close to where I set up my base as well. So typically this is what I rated. But you don't need to go here. You can go in other places in case you don't have the DPS. Go back to the Vernilius Gap or maybe even the Imperial Testing Station number 2 back in the Haga Basin South. Those can work just as fine. You just need the blood and then you just have to go to the trade post and take the quick speed from there all the way back to your base. And that is basically it. If you do this in any of these facilities, you can actually hit two birds with one stone because you can also cover the complex machinery, as many of these bigger outposts do have a lot of enemy refiners that if you look inside of, you're going to notice that they actually give those complex machineries. Otherwise, if you want a direct approach, you can also look at the ironworks. Literally every single ironworks lists complex machineries as rewards, but again, every single outpost should have at least a refiner for you to go ahead and steal from. Now, once you do get enough of that blood, what you're going to be doing is going back to the base. And in this case, you kind of have a couple of options. So initially, I was using the small blood refiners. I was using about 10 to 15 of them. I don't really recommend doing this. So if you can go for the medium ones, go definitely right away because the small ones, not only do you need a ton of them, like 10 to 15, but the conversion rate, the efficiency on them is very low at only 20%. So for every liter of blood that you have, you only get about 200 milliliters of water out of it. So in this case, if you go with the medium version instead, that's going to also hold a lot more. So 24 liters on just one. Plus, it's also going to convert at a 40% efficiency. So if you were to bring 1 liter of blood, it transforms into 400 milliliters of water, which is way, way better. That pretty much means you have to take half the trips that you normally do if you go with the medium version. Do, however, keep in mind that you're going to need quite a lot more complex machineries then, and 50 iron ingots for each and every single one of these. That is why I said that there's quite a bit of backtracking I've done back to Vernilius Gap because I really needed way more iron. But it was totally worth it in this case. And one other thing to note is that you're obviously going to need capacity for that water. So that is why you're going to want to go and craft water cisterns. Initially, I just recommend going for smaller ones, even if you do have to spam them a little bit. They are quite inexpensive, pretty much only about 25 copper ingots. Otherwise, you're going to have to spend even more steel ingots, and maybe that may not be feasible for you. Now, of course, later in the game, water becomes much easier to grab, especially with some of the Dew Reapers. Industrial ones already collect like 10,000 in literally seconds. So it doesn't really matter at that stage, but at this current stage you are at, you're not going to get this just yet. So that is why blood is the best source for now. Now, there's technically one other thing that you can possibly do, especially if you want it a little bit more, let's just say AFK, and that is to put down a wind trap or two. But keep in mind that they can cost quite a bit. So 90 steel ingots, which is a lot, and more silicon blocks and other Servoks over there. However, I did place mine the night before, and this comes in quite useful because overnight, in about like 8 hours or so, it generated about, I don't know, like 17 liters of water, which is pretty good actually. Almost half of a run for me in terms of the final product of how much I got out of it. Its success rate is basically, if I'm not mistaken, like 0.75 every second. So that's how much water it produces every second, 0.75. But over the course of like 10-20 hours, depending how many filters you put in it, it can definitely stack up. Is it efficient? Not really, but like I said, it's very hands-off, and the only thing you need is filters. Do, however, keep in mind that the filters also have a cost. If you go for the standard 8-hour versions, it's also going to be 5 aluminum plus the others. In the case of the makeshift that I started with, it's only steel ingot, 3 per, but you're going to need more. So I went with 3, and that is it. And now that all of the water purifying goes in the background, our next step is to just handle the other resources. By the time we're going to be back, we're going to have liters upon liters of water. So first of all, I recommend going for the aluminum right away, because that's going to be your next biggest bottleneck, as you're going to need about 1700 of them, and you can only carry about 250 for every single run. In this case, what you can do is simply just follow any of these routes over here all across the western, in this case, shield wall, as there are many of them. A lot of them are at the top of many of these mountains. However, if it's difficult for you to get, don't worry, plenty of the roads here have plenty of that aluminum ore for you to gather. And in this case, a couple of minutes at most is what you need. I would say that within 30 minutes, you should cover all of your ingot needs, or the ore needs at the very least in this case. Even if you have to go like 6, 7, or 8 times, that's going to be plenty enough. The respawn timer over here on these ores is very quick. And like I said, if you do have a suspensor belt, you can just go at the top of the nearby mountains. And there are like 5, 6 very close to one another. Now, as far as the Erythrite crystals go, which you don't really need that many, about like 250 to 500 will be enough. You can find a lot of them from the Chome mineral extraction facilities that you're going to find a lot of right here also in the Rift. So again, you will see them by those very interesting like purple glows. Go ahead, collect them, and it's done. Otherwise, for the advanced Servoks and particle capacitors, these are very easy. You literally get them from any single testing station, including the ones literally at the start of the game. And if you combine this, for example, blood farming method with any of these testing stations, you're going to cover both of them at the same time. So quite easy to actually get these. You should not have a problem with it. What you are going to have a bit of a problem with is the Diamondine dust, the Carbide scraps, and the industrial pumps. So let me show you exactly where you actually find them. So in the case of both the Diamondine dust as well as the Carbide scraps, you can find plenty of them in chests right here on this side of the map. It is a place called Misatorial, but you don't have to fight the enemies over here. What you can do is just go all around all of these gaps that you see in between the buildings, also on the upper edges of the mountain range, as well as somewhere behind these. You should find a couple of caves. Just scout around and you should see some of these chests that randomly spawn around, and they have a chance to either give you Carbide scraps or Diamondine dust, and sometimes even both at the same time. And you only need 14 Diamondine dust, and it can drop like 5 at a time, so that's good enough. And Carbide scraps, you only need 7, so that's going to be even easier. Otherwise, what you can do is head over and spend a little bit of money over at the Crossroads trade posts, because the NPC vendor here pretty much sells all of these resources. So you can buy them for like 2, 3, 5,000 Solari, but if you got like 10 of them already and only need like 2 or 3 more, you can totally supplement it that way without wasting any more time. For industrial pumps, as far as I'm aware, there's only one place, or well, one of the places that is the best for it is Sentinel City. In this case, you can enter right here from the southwestern part. There are going to be some difficult enemies, but again, you can focus just on the chests, and they have a chance to give you industrial pumps. 8 of them should suffice, but again, you can also purchase some of them all the way back from the Crossroads trade post. And now that you're done with this, you can go ahead and fully craft your starting Ornithopter. And in this case, it's going to accelerate everything you're going to be doing from this point on so much. Like, for example, I went ahead and installed the inventory capacity, the storage extension for it, which lets me go ahead all on these mountains and pretty much get about 1000 of that aluminum on one single 2-minute run. So I can then funnel it solo into some of my other projects. Literally, it makes everything so easy, even as a solo player from this point on. But not too easy, because you're going to have the next tier 5 and then tier 6 that have their own requirements that exponentially increase. So for the time being, be happy that you just became a lot stronger and made exploration a lot easier. There are many other things that will follow after this, a lot of other ways to collect water, so I'm going to cover that in a different video, but for now, this is it. Thanks much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.